The next one. That's
So
good.
let me continue from where I stopped. So
Yes, sir.
we have the absolute and we have the relative. So and relative always depending on something on the page. And the first one I'm explaining right now is the rem. So when you are using the rem unit, anytime you are using rem, whatever the value beside it, you always multiply it by the font size of the HTML. So if you are using 5 rem, what you are actually saying there is that 5 times the font size of the HTML. That's the final value. That's how it works. Anytime you are using 5 pixels, 5 pixels is always 5 pixels. Anytime you are using 5 pixels, 5 px is always 5 px. But if you change it to 5 rem, this is not 5 pixels again. This one now, you have to multiply this 5 by the font size of the HTML. I hope you get it now. Whatever the font size of
Sir.
HTML, that's what you multiply the number beside rem with. Yes.
Yes, I can hear you there. And I get it. I get it.
So the way the rem works is that anywhere you are seeing rem being used, look at the font size of the HTML. Then that font size is what you multiply by the number beside the rem. And by default, the font size of the HTML is 16 pixels. If you don't change it right now, I've changed my own on line 32. You can actually change the font size of HTML to anything you want. Whatever the font size you are using, that's what you'll be using, not the default one. If you change it, you have to be using the one that you change it to because of the way the rem work. Rem is all relative to the font size of the HTML. And once you change the font, it will be using the new font size that you change it to, not the default one. But if you don't do anything with the font size of the HTML, then you can go along with the default font size that you have on the HTML. So here now, I'm not doing any changes again on the HTML, then it will go back to the default, which is 16. So which means this 5 rem is just 5 times 16. But if you change it to another value, if you change the font size of HTML to another value, then you have to use that new value that you change the font size to multiply. Because this thing is relative, it's always changing based on the new value of whatever they are depending on. So if what is depending on change, then it will recalculate the new value again. That's how all the relative work. The difference between them is what they are depending on, but they work the same way. So if you are dealing with pixels, it doesn't change. But if you are dealing with rem, or you are dealing with percentage, or you are dealing with VW or VH, they are always changing based on something. They are always changing based on something. For the rem is always depending on the font size of the HTML. So rem always depend on the font size of what? HTML. So which means any number you have in rem, you always multiply by the font size of the HTML. I hope you get it now.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So,
sir.
so now let me move on to the next one, which is another one that you need to know about that we'll be using later on, or you two you'll be using, which is percentage. I just use it now, but you see that something is changing. But why is it changing? So I'll be explaining it now. This is percentage here. So this percentage, so how does it work too? This one too is relative. So and when you are using it, it has something that is depending on. But in order for you to see what is depending on, let me quickly create the HTML file or the HTML element that will make this thing to be clear to you because I don't want you to start looking at what is going on here. So let me create a div and let me call it percent par like this. So inside it, I'm going to have h1 testing percentage units like this. Then after it, I'm going to have a paragraph with lorem 10 with just normal text like this. So this is how percentage work. This is how percentage work. I hope you can see my screen. I hope you can see my hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. I can see your screen, sir.
Okay.
I'm with
Let
you,
me
Audrey.
explain percentage now. What I explained first is rem. The next one I
I
want to
know, sir. I'm
explain
with
now.
you, sir.
What did he say?
Okay, okay, no, no. Okay.
You miss your mic, sir.
Nance, can you mute your mic?
Hello, can you see my screen? Hello.
Yes, sir, I can see your screen 100, sir.
Yeah. So look at it now. Look at the two items that I have.
Yes, sir.
Look at the two items
Hello,
that
sir.
I
I'm
have.
with you. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yes, yes, yes. No, network is behind. Like you are a few seconds late. So what I'm saying here, look at the element that I have here. Look at what I'm selecting on this line 200 to 206. Can you see my VS code? Can you see my VS code? Can you see what I just highlighted now? These two selector, can you see them?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
Dot wait.
yes, you know that's class selector. I don't need to be explaining that again. Which means and again I'm
Hello.
giving it. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I can see them, sir. You can
Yeah,
go on, sir.
yeah. I gave the first one background color of um red, and the second one background color of yellow, because I'm targeting the H1 that is inside it. But I want to do something right now. So I want to give this one a width so that you'll be able to understand how percentage work. So I want this one to have a width of 300 pixels. By now you know what pixels means. Pixels means that it is absolute.
Yes,
Whatever
sir.
value you have beside it, that's what it's going to use. So which means if I inspect this element here, if I inspect this div, and if I look at the weight, as you can see, it stays 300. So whatever I use beside pixels, that's what the browser will use, and it doesn't change. But right now, I want to use other units with the child. The parent is having a width of 300 pixels, but now I want the child to have a width of 50% here. So how does percentage work? So look at the parent.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Just listen. Your audio is kind of like at your side is maybe a little bit lagging. So just calm down. The thing will get to your side. So instead of saying hello, 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 it's just making the video to get longer, and my battery is really running. So just calm down. It will get to your side because I think your audio is a little bit lagging or so like that. So that's why I'm a bit forward or so. So what I'm saying here is that just calm down, wait for the audio to get to that side, and you get to understand the stuff. So I have two elements from the HTML. I have two elements from the HTML. I have this div. Inside the div, I have the H1 and this P. And that's what I'm targeting here from the CSS. So the div, I'm targeting it with this class by changing the background colors to red and the width to 300 pixels. And again, I'm targeting the H1 that is inside it to have a background color of yellow. But now I'm saying the width should be 50%. But what does this percentage represent in CSS? This is one of the relative units. And the way percentage work is that it works between parent and child. The percentage unit work in between the child and the parent. And the way it works is that the percentage of the child will always depend of the same property on the parent. So here I have this div which is having this class par. Inside it I have h1 and I have p. So I'm targeting this div in my css, which I'm giving this width of 300 pixels, the background of red. And again, I'm targeting the H1 that is inside it with a background of this. I'm giving it a background of yellow. But now I'm not saying the weight should be 50%. So how is the CSS going to get the final value of this particular H1 here? So how is it going to calculate the value of this 50%? So if, what this percentage means is that whatever value or whatever property that you are using this percentage with, it will look at the parent of the element and calculate the percentage based on that property of the parent. So here on the child I have width of 50%. So in order for you to get the final value here, the final value is going to be 50% of the width of the parent of the element where you are using the percentage from. So since I'm using this percentage on this h1 and the h1 is inside this div, then the final value of this 50% will be half of what I have there. So which is going to be 50% of 300 pixels. That's how percentage work. Percentage is always depending on the parent of the based on the child. So if the child is having a percentage, the property where you are using that percentage, it will look at that same property on the parent and it will calculate the percentage based on that value from the parent. So which means here now that I'm using 50%, it will go to the parent and calculate the 50% of the parent. Whatever value is getting from that parent, that's what is going to use on the child. So here the parent is 300. So what is now going to be the 50% of the parent? That's 250. So that's going to be 150. So that means the child now is going to take 150. So if I save this code, you see that the h1 is now half of its parent. So anytime you are using a percentage, the percentage is always between child and parent. And anytime you are using a percentage on the child, it will look at the same property where you are using it from on the child, it will look at it on the parent, and whatever the value of that property, it will take the percentage, and whatever the final value you get there, that's what is going to use for the child. And as you can see from here, the parent is having a width of 300, but I said the child should have 50%. So that means it's going to take half, and that's why you see that it's using 150 as the final value. What I have here is 50%, but the final value is 150. Where is this 150 coming from? It will look at this same property on the parent, and whatever the value there, it will take the percentage of it, and the final value, that's what is going to use for the child. So here now, if I say the child should be 70%, what I'm saying is that go to the width of the parent of this one. Whatever the width of the parent, take 70% of it, and that value is what I want to use for this h1. So what this one is saying is that this width of this h1 should be 70% of the width of the parent where this h1 is coming from. So whatever percentage you are using on the child, it will be calculating it based on that same property on the parent. So if you said the font size, should be 70%, what you are saying is that the font size of this element should be 70% of the font size of the parent of this element. So if the font size of this parent is 20 pixels, that means it's going to take 70% of it. So that's how percentage work. Percentage work based on child and parent relation there. So the relationship between the child and the parent, that's what percentage use to calculate the final value. So if the parent is having a width of 300 pixels and I say the child should have 70%, what this one will do is that it will go to the parent and take 70% of it, of the weight of the parent. Then whatever the value is getting there, that's what it will use for the child. And as you can see here, the weight is down 210. Where is it getting this 210 from? What I type is 70%. What I type is 70%, but the final value is 210. What is going on there is that it will take 70% of the width of the parent, and whatever the final value, that's what it will now use for the child. That's how percentage work. Percentage work based on child and parent relationship. That is like the relation between the parent and the child. That's what it works on. So whatever the property you are using on the child and you are using percentage in front of it, it will go to the parent and look for that same property, and it will take the percentage that you mentioned there, and whatever the final value, that's what is going to use for the child. So if the parent is having a width of 250 pixels, then it means 70% of that 250 pixels is what the child is going to use. So if the parent is having a width of 500 and you said the child should have 70% of the weight, then it means this 70% will be calculated based on this 500, and the value that you are getting there is what the child is going to use. Relative are always depending on something. Rem is depending on the font size of the HTML, while percentage is depending on the font size. The rem is depending on the font size of the HTML, while the percentage is depending on the same property of the parent of that element. So here I have two elements. The first one is the div, which is the parent, and inside it I have h1. So I want the width of this h1 now to be 70% of its parent. So, and how do you do it? When you want to use percentage, it's always depending on the parent property. So if it's talk about the width of the child, then it will go to the parent and take the percentage of that same property from the parent. So if the parent is having a width of 500 pixels and you put the same property on the child, but now you are using percentage, then what this thing will do is that this same percentage that you have there, it will go to the parent and look for that same property there, and that property, it will take the percentage of the value, and whatever the percentage final value, that's what is going to use on the child. So what you are saying here is that the width of this element here, this h1 that is inside this div, is going to be 50% of whatever that parent width is. So if here now, if I use 20, what I'm saying is that the total width of this element here is going to be 20% of the width of its parent. So if the parent of this one is 200 pixels, it means it will take 20% of that 200 pixels. If the percentage of this thing is 50 and the parent is having 500, it means it will take 50% of this 500, which is going to be 250. So which means the final value of the width of this h1 will be 250. So anytime you're using percentage, it's always in between child and parent. So whatever property you are using on the child that you give that percentage, you go to the parent and look at that the value of that property. Whatever the value you have there, you take the percentage, and the final value you get there is what the child is going to use it. That's how percentage works. Percentage is always depending on the parent. So whatever element that is using percentage, it will look at the parent of it, and the same property that you are using that percentage on, it will go to the parent and look for it, take the percentage, and whatever final value you get there, that's what the child is going to use as the final value. Just because I'm typing 50% here doesn't mean it will show 50% on the screen here as the final value. The percentage here, or the 210 you are seeing here, is because of or it's not going to even be 210, because if I save the code, it will be 250 now, because the parent has already changed to 500. But now if I change it to 400, you see that the new value will get recalculated. I did not change this 50%. The word I change is the parent, and you see that the value gets recalculated, because that's how relative units work. Whatever they are depending on, if that value change, they will recalculate the new value so that it matches that parent or whatever they are depending on. So percentage is depending on the same property of the parent of that element. So when you say this one now, if I give it a font size, and if I say the font size should just be 20%, what I'm saying here is that whatever the font size of this h1 will always be 20% of whatever the font size of this element here. And how do you get all this in? That's the reason why I'm showing you this developer tools here, because this thing is very important when you are just starting, because there is no way you know some of the value. But how do you know some of these values that I'm mentioning here? It's because of this dev environment or the dev tools. And how do you bring the dev tools out? Just go to the setting of any of the browser you are using. If it is Edge or any of the Chrome browser, just click on the three dots and go to more tools. Under the more tools, you are going to see developer tools down here. This is one way of getting it. Another way of getting it, just right click on any element, and from there you are going to see specs. So if you click on it, it will bring the same thing out. And as you can see, it's going to bring out the element, which is the one that hold all the HTML that you have on the page. And apart from that, it will show the CSS under it by default. So another it will be under this style, which shows all the style you are applying on the element. But this doesn't mean, as you can see, it's showing 50% here, but that doesn't mean that is the final value that the browser is using. In order for you to see the final value, you need to be under this computed. The computed is one that will show you the final value that the browser is using, the final value. That's why it is under computed. After the browser has already computed, do all the necessary mathematics that it needs to do behind the scene, you see all the final value here. And if you look at it, what we specify there is this 50%. But by the time you get to the browser, is than 200 pixels. Where is this 200 pixels coming from? Is because of the way the percentage work. I told you that when you are dealing with percentage, you are going to have the child, which is where the percentage is going to be. So the child is the one that is having the percentage, which is this 50%. So how is it going to calculate this 50% to get this 200? Is because here the percentage is always depending on the same property from the parent. So this H1 is inside this particular element. So since it's inside this one, it will look at the width of that parent, and whatever the width, it will take percentage of it, and that percentage is what now going to be the final value that you are going to have there on the browser. So percentage is always in between the child and parent. So if you say the child should have a width of 25%, it will go to the parent and look for the width of that parent. Then it will now take 25% of the value of that parent. And whatever the value, that's what the child is going to use. But if you are using rem, so if you are using rem instead of a percentage, I mentioned it that one deal with the font size of HTML. So which means here now, if I use rem, the final value here is going to be 50 times whatever the font size of the HTML. That's how it works. When you're using rem, whatever value beside it will be multiplied by the font size of HTML. And I told you by default, the font size of HTML is 16 pixels if you don't change it. So which means if you don't change it, it will be 16 times 50. So which means the final value here is going to be around that 800 pixels because the default font size is 16 and we did not change it. But assuming I'm changing it to something else, maybe like 20, you see that the no value will be 50 times 20, which is the reason why we're having 1000 here. So whatever the font size of the HTML, that's what rem always depending on. But when you're talking about percentage is depending on the same property of the parent, of the element that you are working with. So since this element here is inside this div with this class pi here, then it will go there, look for the width of that element, and whatever the width, it will take the 50% of it. It will never go to another property. It's the same property that you are using on the child that it will use to calculate the final value on the parent based on the parent value there. And this is how this rem and percentage work. So tomorrow I'll be talking about the other unit that we have there, which is this VW and this VH, before we move into variable, and later on in our physical class next week there we'll go into lesson C straightforward. But tomorrow I'll be talking about this VW, VH. I'll forget about this one for now because that's a property that we used to use it with that you need to know about first before you dive into this unit. But when you get to the time it's needed, that's what I will bring in there. But we have absolutes, which means they don't change. They don't depend on anything on the page. 20 is always 20, 30 is always 30. But when you're talking about relative, just because you are using 50 beside them doesn't mean you get 50 back. Or because you are putting 20 doesn't mean you get 20. They are depending on something on the page. And when that thing they are depending on change, then the new value will get recalculated for you like that. The relative unit is really, really powerful because there's a lot of things you don't want to be doing yourself that you want this thing to be changing according to what is going on the screen. And that's where all these things come into use. And as you can see now, the font size is 6 pixels. Why is it 6 pixels? Because it's taking whatever the font size of this one and it's taking the percentage of it. So here now, if I say the font size of this one now should be maybe like 40 pixels. So since this one is 40 pixels, that means the 20% of 40 pixels, that's what this one will be using, which is going to be whatever the final value you will get in. And as you can see, it's now using 8 pixels. But now if I change it to 50% there like that, which is supposed to give us what we are looking for, as you can see, is now 20 pixels. Why is it 20 pixels? Because whatever the value you are using from the child, it will go to the parent, look for that same property, then whatever percentage again that you're using for it, it will take it from that parent, and the final value is what the child will now be using. So what we are saying here is that I want the font size of this thing to be 50% or to be half of whatever the font size of the parent. The same thing with the width too. I want the width of this H1 to be half because that 50% is half. Or if I'm using 70% or 75%, whatever percentage you are using. So what we are saying here is that I want this width of this H1 to be 70% of whatever the width of the parent. Don't forget, whatever property you are using the percentage with it will go to the parent and calculate it based on that same property of the parent. So which means this thing you are making it to be proportional to the parent. So if the parent change, then the child too will calculate the no value automatically. That's where all these relative things comes in, so that you don't start doing all the calculation in your head later on. If you want to take 50% of anything, just give me percentage. It will look at the parent. It will always calculate it based on the parent. And tomorrow we continue from there. So this will be all. Thank you, everyone.
So I have questions.